Who doesn't love an Ultramarine? I'll tell you who. Idiot. Okay, yeah, I already used this bit before. But for real, who doesn't love most of the video games the Ultramarines feature in? Even if it's only because the games most people think of now are Space Marine, Bolt Gun, and Space Marine 2. As far as games the common Warhammer player actually cares about, they're 3 for 3. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is another slam dunk. In fact, even though this is a YouTuber sin, here's the review for a good 90% of you. If you like Space Marine 1, you'll like Space Marine 2. That being said, for those of you who want to either have a bit more in-depth of a look at the game, or just want some background noise for a bit, stick around. Space Marine 2 is undoubtedly a great game, but it's a great game held back by some relatively small complaints that add up over time. Do these complaints detract from the fundamentals of the game? Not really, no. This game is phenomenal and well worth your time. But there's enough of them at time of recording that even if my mentioning of them can horribly date the video, they're still worth considering. If you're gonna hate me for daring to criticize the popular thing right now, then fair enough. I'll see you in the dislike ratio of YouTube Studios. For everyone else, strap in to hear another Space Marine 2 glazing session with just a bit of criticism. I promise you that even if it sounds like a lot, it's only a hint. But before we start, did you know Space Marine 2 isn't the only game with Captain Titus? Do you know where else you can find this glorious man? Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, the sponsor of this video. Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus is a fast-paced turn-based strategy game set in where else but the Warhammer 40,000 universe. With over 70 champions to collect, you've got quite the roster to choose from to form your squad of choice. As you can probably guess, I like the Eldari. I'm working on getting Jane Zar and Maugan Ra unlocked, but you can rest easy knowing every time I have a choice, I'm bringing all the Eldari I can into the field. But they're not the star of this season. That's none other than our boy Titus. Titus is a real cool dude. After being taken by the Inquisition, he was eventually freed and has rejoined the Ultramarines as Lieutenant Titus in both Space Marine 2 and Tacticus. And he's a monster to be sure, easily one of the top characters when it comes to tankiness, and he'll rip enemies apart with no issues either. With his passive that lets him resurrect theoretically infinitely as long as he kills an enemy in melee with his dying swing, you'll be seeing a lot of him to be sure. And with all those champions to collect, don't worry, Titus gets the backup he deserves. The survival event he came with was a lot of fun, fighting off hordes of Tyranids for as long as you can. And since events like this are regularly introduced to Tacticus, there's no need to worry if you've missed it. Something just as good will come along and take its place. With all these champions and fun gameplay, there's no time like the present to download Tacticus. Use the QR code or my link in the description to download the game, join my guild because I want to upgrade my Eldari more, and get ready to experience warfare in the grimdark future of Warhammer 40,000 like never before. Now then, time to finish what Captain Titus started? It technically works for this game too. As a warning, gameplay spoilers throughout the video, but I'll try and keep the story spoilers mostly together. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is a game by Saber Interactive set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe following a Space Marine around for the second time. Very thankfully, this is not one of those games where the title tells you nothing. It tells you everything you need to know. You are Lieutenant Titus, a former captain of the Ultramarine 2nd Company turned Inquisition prisoner, turned Deathwatch member, turned Ultramarine 2nd Company lieutenant. This man has had a storied history over several hundreds of years, and there's no rest for him yet. If you care, his story can be found out in this video of mine here, but I promise you from the bottom of my heart, you need to know absolutely none of it to enjoy this game to the fullest. Blue Man is here to kill aliens, traitors, and demons, and that's all you require to have fun. To get the boring stuff out of the way first, the presentation of this game ranges from serviceable to amazing. Going from least to most impressive, the music is fine. I know this sounds rather derogatory, but I don't mean it in that way necessarily. Think of it as being the least great part of the game. It's suited to the game, is fitting to every moment, and certainly sounds like a 40K soundtrack. There's only two real criticisms I actually have of it, really. The first is that it's constantly drowned out by the gameplay. The general audio has a similar problem, although less so. Both music and speech will oftentimes be cut out through the sounds of gunfire and chainswords. This isn't much of a problem with speech because subtitles exist, but if you want to properly hear the music, you better turn down the rest of the audio. The second criticism is that while the soundtrack certainly isn't bad, it isn't too memorable. In the moment, it's very fitting and can pump you up for a fight, but Warhammer 40K audiences have been spoiled for music. Between games like the Dawn of War series, Mechanicus, and even Darktide for all its flaws, Space Marine 2 is in the unfortunate position of having a good soundtrack in a crowd of phenomenal soundtracks. I mean no disrespect to the composers of the score, it is good. It's just that Children of the Omnissiah makes me want to rip my body apart and replace it with IKEA furniture, so it has some serious competition. The voice acting is great though. Mark Strong may no longer be with us, but Clive Standen gives us one hell of a performance instead.
We need to kill the Hive Tyrant, find whoever is jamming us, and get the message inside the relay. Lance of Jove, we are heading for the bridge. Status report.
Damage is worse than I thought. Tech priests are working on it now.
Keep me updated. Brothers, let us proceed.
Vengeance for Magnus
as your fallen brothers. You at least can
Everyone
still
present is hamming it up exactly like a Warhammer character should, with everything being taken 110% serious at all times. It's phenomenal. My favorite speeches are whenever the Guard are doing their thing and dying for the Emperor. The only criticism I really have here is that some of the bolters could have slightly more base. When that's all I have to say, we're in good territory. You heard the audio, you heard the sound of me ripping Tyranids and Thousand Sons apart. What can I possibly add to that? Speaking of, you also saw it. The visuals of this game are disgustingly good. Even compared to Space Hulk Deathwing, I don't think a single game has captured 40K as well as this one has, at least on the Space Marine side of things. Space Marines from when Titus is a firstborn to after he goes across the Rubicon Primaris are portrayed flawlessly, and they hulk above the common people you see throughout the campaign. Their armor is excessively detailed, and the ship that acts as the mission hub looks exactly like you'd think it would. There's servitors milling around, tech adepts arguing with them, a tech priest in this massive contraption that acts as the armory. Your battle brothers will hold services for fallen Astartes. The chaplain talks about how the enemies of the Emperor of Mankind will be scoured from their tainted lands. And thank God, for once they didn't skimp out on 40K being weird and wrong. Servitors, the floating baby cherub things. The astropathic choir room full of chained up psychers who are presumably in a great deal of pain. Humanity in 40K is broken and wrong on a fundamental level, and the developers understood that and portrayed it fantastically. I'm of the opinion that a 40K game hasn't truly realized things if the Imperium doesn't on some level disturb me, and they knocked it out of the park. All of this is rendered in the most stunning graphics ever seen in Warhammer. Even if that sort of thing doesn't really mean anything to you, you have to admit the first time you see the Tyranids properly swarming, you'll have your breath taken away. It'll be taken away again the first time Captain Titus takes out a century of Inquisition-given rage on some poor Hormigaunt. I know the Chaplain is probably the closest thing to this position, but someone should really give the Ultramarines a therapist, or at least some more time off. They're all the defenders of mankind, the last bulwark against Terra, and all that self-important stuff. I get it. But when every single finisher looks like Captain Titus or whoever else is imagining the Tyranid they're taking apart is their stepdad who told them they couldn't stay up past 10:30 on school nights, maybe it's time someone took them to a bar and asked them if they were doing alright. This is, in other words, exactly the kind of brutal violence we're all here for. The moment-to-moment animations are smooth as butter, the weaker enemies just outright explode when you hit them, and the executions have almost certainly got someone put on a watch list of some kind. You don't have this level of brutal violence without having some kind of mental damage, and I'm happy that whoever designed them has those issues, because ripping Tyranids apart has never been so fun. On every visual level, Space Marine 2 is a masterpiece. This, of course, comes with some performance issues, but we'll save that for the end. I still want to glaze the game. Now for the meat and potatoes of this video, the gameplay. Space Marine 2 is, to be entirely frank, exactly what I and probably most people wanted. Space Marine 1, but upgraded. Once again, it delivers. The shooting is tight and responsive, the melee system feels a bit less like being a figure skater, and almost every hit you land has a noticeable weight to it. Enemies react how anyone would to having a thunder hammer thrown in their face. Some weapons like the chainsword and combat knife only really get consistent reaction out of gaunt enemies or Zangors, but the power fist and thunder hammer stun pretty much everything that isn't a boss in one go. Initial impressions led me to believe that the Thunder Hammer would be completely worthless with how slow it is. That was just Dark Souls brain rot talking. It hits everyone around you with the backswing, and because the game's favorite trick is to throw 5 Tyranid warriors at you around every corner, you really want its ability to stun people easily. Speaking of weapons though, in the campaign there aren't really any shooting weapons that are noticeably worse than the others. With one exception that's only really used for a gimmick level segment, which I'm sad to report sucks absolute balls. The 5 trillion different variety of bolt guns I'll rip through weaker enemies like a knife through butter, and enough concentrated firepower will bring down anything after enough time. Even the pistols feel great to use because Space Marine 2 remembers that these are bolt pistols. The flashlights are for the guard all around you, who thankfully have a pretty substantial presence in this game, but on your end, there's no weapon in your arsenal that isn't worth using at least once to try it out. Personal preference will likely determine what weapons you pick up and use off the ground more than anything, which is a sign of good balance. This is counteracted by your enemies outnumbering you 1,000,000 to 1. Let's talk about the campaign while we're at it. No major spoilers yet, I'll let you know when I start talking story proper. For reference, this is all done on the veteran difficulty, or heroic as I keep calling it. The hardest one is something I'm not brave enough for, and veteran is a nice mix between challenge and power fantasy that makes this game fun. For the tutorial, you start off as Firstborn Titus. The intro cutscene immediately lets you know what you're in for when Titus and co have their ship doors ripped open by Tyranids. Each of them kills dozens each, and it just doesn't matter. You get knocked out of your ship through sheer weight of numbers and have to regroup with your squad, who all die right before or after you reach them. And in just about every encounter you face, you're outnumbered 20 to 1. You can kill one Tyranid with no problem. Hell, you can kill those first 20 easily. But every hit wears you down just a bit. Hormagaunts surround you up close, Termagants line up a firing squad of 10 and decimate your health, and the warriors can go all in on melee or have a nasty mix of range and CQC. And every now and again as the story goes on, the game throws some zoanthropes or relictor at you, just to keep you on your toes. Slowly your health and ammo get whittled down, because even though you're one of the Emperor's angels, his enemies are without number and all want you dead. Every ammo refill, total refill or not, feels like a victory. Every medical stim pack is a well-earned respite. Speaking of, keeping your health up is also harder than ever before because of probably the biggest gameplay change they've made: executions. The same basic idea still applies. Weaken an enemy enough, then you can perform a finisher on them that could drown a man in blood. The change comes in what they restore. Your armor, or contempt, or whatever you feel like calling the thing before your actual health goes down, is back in a slightly different way. It replenishes over time, but it takes a while, and if you're jumping back and forth into fights, it won't have time to come back. Executions refill a single bar of this armor. They also restore health that you've recently lost, as does dealing damage normally. If you've played Bloodborne, you'll have a good idea of how this works. It necessitates getting in there and continuing the slaughter, which is great. The change comes from the fact that aside from being able to quickly regain a portion of your lost health, executions no longer restore health if it's been too long. As a trade-off, you're now invulnerable when performing an execution, unlike in the first game where the orcs could still gather around you for cockslaps. I'm not sure how to feel about this. On the one hand, reflexively slamming the execution button is baked into the brains of everyone who plays these kinds of games. It's nice that it no longer punishes you for watching the cool animations the game has. On the other hand, executing enemies is no longer enough to get you out of a tricky situation. Instead, you get a brief 3-second breather, and then you're back in the shit pit. If anything, it might get you killed quicker, because as you're finishing one warrior, another 20 are surrounding you to kick your ass when you're done. It's a side grade as a mechanic. I think my ideal version would be you take reduced damage, but still some, and gain less health than the first game, but it's still an option. That way there's less risk of the game grinding to a halt because you went for the kill while a zoanthrope was charging its Kamehameha at you. The medical stims and guardian relics you can find on the ground do help alleviate this, as well as give you additional options for recovering your health, but beating people up so hard they gave you life points was very fun. I want to see it return. Aside from that, the basic gameplay loop is the same with some extra features. You can now parry enemies, which is a godsend, and your dodges can grant you a very brief moment of slow-mo bullet time. In each case, you might see a red crosshair appear over the enemy. Shoot your gun, and you whip out your pistol and deal massive damage. If you've hit them even a few times beforehand, it might outright kill even the tougher enemies, and if not, it'll at least get them close to execution range. Even during boss fights, and there are several boss fights this time around that don't suck, you can cut them down by almost a full segment of their health bar. Aside from being a great way to keep the pace up, it also just feels awesome. It makes the Space Marines feel almost like they used to in Rogue Trader. You're not just a genetically modified super monk, you're a stone-cold space cop patrolling the Imperium streets and dishing out the Emperor's justice. The last major gameplay change is abilities. Instead of entering a bloodlust with slow-mo ranged attack like the first game, each of the 3 campaign characters gets their own unique ability. I'm gonna call it an ultimate because of MOBA brain. Titus's ult lets him regen health, Gadriel screams, which damages enemies and pushes them back, and Chiron uses an Auspex to mark enemies and up how much damage they take. The multiplayer classes all have their own abilities, which I'll talk about later. Now here's the first qualifier I'm gonna give the game. If you don't like the combat, you're not gonna like this game. The combat isn't just the driving force of the game, it's also the wheels, suspension, mirrors, and turning signal. Buying Space Marine 2 solely for the story is something you shouldn't do unless you're a Warhammer lore channel, and quite frankly it's not even good for those of us in that particular asshole of the internet for just that purpose alone. That being said, the gameplay is really good. I can understand looking at it and thinking it might get repetitive. I promise you it doesn't. I've put over 30 hours into the game within a week, and I haven't yet had the thought of, I should take a break from this. It plays so well that you can get countless hours out of it without feeling bored, and in an action game, that's all that matters. Purely on the level of moment-to-moment gameplay, this game is a 9 out of 10. It'd be a 10 out of 10 without my slight complaint over the executions, and if you want to just go ahead and call that personal taste, I don't blame you. I'm going to talk about the campaign now, so if you don't want spoilers, click ahead to the chapter on operations. Fair warning though, in terms of story, you're not missing that much. If you're a massive Ultramarines fan though, then definitely skip ahead if you haven't seen spoilers or beaten it yourself, because this is the kind of stuff you want to see without spoilers towards the end of the campaign. Alright, now that everyone who's going to leave is left, I'll level with you all. The story didn't terribly grab me, but multiple people have told me similar things that made me see it in a new light. This is very much a Space Marine story. If you like Space Marine stories, you're in. If you don't, and to be quite frank with you, I'm not terribly into them, you probably won't like the story that much. That being said, I stick by what I said earlier. If you in particular like the Ultramarines, even just a little bit, the ending bits of this game are going to make you blow your load for Macragge. Titus starts out as a member of the Death Watch, like I said. For a variety of reasons I will redirect you here for, he's no longer a member of the Ultramarines' second company, but is instead a Black Shield of the Death Watch. This is because Space Marines handle losses to their honor, actual ones or perceived ones, only slightly better than Dwarf Slayers. Everyone in this ship is a helmeted Space Marine, so their fates are already sealed. Titus launches a virus bomb, gets mauled by a Carnifex, and to save his life undergoes the Rubicon Primaris to become an even spacier Space Marine. Once again a member of the second company, though now cursed with being a Primaris lieutenant, Titus takes command of a squad of Ultramarines to stave off the Tyranid threat facing our boys in blue. Now's a good time to bring up some more issues. Early on, the other two Ultramarines with you in the main campaign, Gadriel and Chiron, are a bit awkward around Titus. Gadriel tries to make conversation with their new lieutenant, and I swear to God he was seconds away from asking Titus how the weather was or what his major in college was to have the slightest grasp of something to talk about. But you know, they've never met the guy, and Titus's history as a member of the Death Watch and even his actual history as an Ultramarine towards the end of his career aren't known to them. I get it. As the campaign progresses, Titus gives them some mentorship on the foe they face. He did clean up after the first battle of Macragge against the Tyranids, so he knows his stuff when it comes to fighting them. Unfortunately for the group, conflict starts piling up as the game goes on. Titus, during his time as a captive with the Inquisition and a member of the Death Watch, has become a bit withdrawn, keeping things a lot closer to his chest. And that's fine, I wouldn't be too personable after that happened to me. But then his experience with a certain artifact, combined with the after effects of the Rubicon Primaris, caused him to have a stroke or something mid-battlefield, which naturally concerns his brothers. Titus's response to this is to just brush them off, and as his squad mates begin to learn more about his past and question him about it, his response to them is to be a massive asshole about everything.
It seems I am not the only one on this ship with concerns about your intentions. It is the chaplain's responsibility to ensure our chapter remains pure, not yours. Your erratic behavior is plain for all to see. And now, I find you have a history of it. I am doing my duty, as I was then, protecting a system from ruin.
Space Marine 1 had very few moments where the characters spoke on anything but the mission at hand, and it seems they decided to go in a different direction here by having Titus and the other two beat each other's throats for the first 2/3 of the game. Initially it was to the point that I've seen people praising how the game makes the Space Marines really feel like a brotherhood, and I'd wonder if I was missing something. The background fellas feel like brothers, to be sure, but a good deal of the campaign is three men either awkwardly trying to hold a conversation or completely distrusting one another. It doesn't get resolved in a terribly nuanced way either. In a literal burst of magic, Titus is cleared in the eyes of Gadriel and Chiron when a possessed psyker was trying to kill him, but she was killed herself. I think I wouldn't mind it too much if Titus's thing from the first game wasn't that he was a pretty smart and outside-the-box thinking kind of fella. Seeing a reasonable character go all, "I cannot share my secrets with you, trust me, I know best," is a little bit annoying. Perhaps reasonable given what he went through between the games, but it doesn't have any weight because we only get to see him as a Death Watch for one mission and none of the inquisitorial torture. It's a lot of tell don't show. Speaking of the other squad mates though, let's talk about them a bit. Gadriel is the least interesting of the pair to me, which he makes up for by having the most handsome face a Space Marine could ever have. This man belongs in a hair conditioner commercial, not in a Astartes chapter. He's a bit of a glory hound, and he does try to eventually kill Titus right before all that possessed psyker stuff goes down, but for the most part, he's calm enough. Wished he was a bit more interesting, but I've no major complaints. He does star in the funniest scene in the game, which is pretty awesome, so I'll give him that.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action, but I am looking forward to it.
It's actually amazing how the most hated 40k character isn't Erebus or any Chaos-corrupted character, it's Leandros. Chiron is the more interesting one. He's not just a Primaris, he's one of the original Grey Shields, the first of the Primaris created by Khal. They were all around during the Horus Heresy, so though they're not as experienced in warfare, they can sort of remember the Imperium's glory days. Gadriel might be a Grey Shield as well, but I don't believe it was ever brought up unless I missed it. For Chiron though, he's also a native of Calth. You know, the planet the Wordbearers glassed alongside a good third of the Ultramarines during the Horus Heresy. So he's got a bit of a vendetta against traitors, even more so than the average Imperial does already. To the extent that at one point you would think he was a Blood Angel who just saw 50 Horusi. Because of this, despite him being the one to ride Titus's ass about his past far more than Gadriel does, he's also the one who stood by Titus when the Psyker went a bit nutty. To be fair to the game, having the person accusing you of heresy turn out to be possessed is a great way to clear your name, so as far as a legitimate reason for Titus's squadmates to get off his case goes, that's a good one. And even if you're like me and you don't love the story, you probably won't be that upset because that's not what you're here for. You're here to watch Titus process a century of trauma at the hands of Inquisition by way of Tyranid and Thousand Sun genocide. And after that mission, they do make up and respect each other, and the brotherly atmosphere of the Space Marines is back in full force. I guess I just wish they talked it out a bit more. It'd be nice to see the issues properly discussed, rather than it all boils down to Titus briefly mentions the Death Watch and a traitor wanted him dead, so all suspicion is halted. But hey, maybe it's just because they're Space Marines and I'm subconsciously malding this isn't an Eldar game. I'm sure someone who's read all the Horus Heresy will appreciate it a lot more than I do. Speaking of traitors though, let's talk about the Thousand Suns. The Chaos villain of Space Marine 2 is so much more fun to fight. Not really a twist villain because they're part of the marketing, but there were bloodthirsters on the cover of Space Marine 1, so we're keeping the form. In Space Marine 1, Chaos was this annoying bullet sponge enemy that didn't react to shots until they finally croaked, but here they're a blast to fight. Traitor Guardsmen, as normal, explode when you so much as look at them, but the Rubric Marines and Sorcerers get staggered, react to volleys of fire, teleport all over combat. They even cast illusions, so you end up chasing shadows while the actual enemy lays into you. The nature of the game means that there's only so many differences in how you fight them, but they did a good job differentiating how they could, and it's still just as fun as fighting Tyranids in my opinion. You might think executing a Rubric Marine isn't as fun since they're just full of dust. Then you pull one's head off and he explodes into rainbows and falls apart. The Sorcerers are still meaty though, so if it does bother you, then you've still got something that bleeds as you rip it into pieces to fight. And while it wasn't their introduction in the game, the boss fight after the Psyker business is actually my favorite in the whole game. It plays like a cross between Dark Souls and Toho, which makes sense. The Thousand Suns used to love their Smite spam and R Blue, so I'm sure eventually we'll get a mod that replaces this fight with Shirno. There are also Zangors here, because you will buy the Thousand Suns Combat Patrol box, but at least here you can kick them in the hell where they belong. Before the game comes to an end, you're finally allowed to blow your Ultramarine load as all the spectacle in the world is let loose. The Dreadnoughts are a phenomenal part of this game. My thoughts exactly, Gadriel. Stupid Helldrake thinks it's safe, and then the Dreadnought just chucks a statue at it. This man has woken up after 500 years of sleep, and all he cares about is putting you in the ground and going back to his nap. And while I know the statue is what everyone is talking about, because I've seen a lot of clips of it on Twitter, it's not even the coolest thing he does.
Vile sons of madness. Is he here?
He is not.
Then my hatred must be directed at his minions.
One of the original Traitor Legions, the most powerful Psykers in the galaxy short of the Eldar, and the Dreadnought goes, "Where's your daddy?" Somewhere in the warp, Magnus is sweating buckets, because I know for a fact this Dreadnought would make the fall of Prospero look like child's play. You might think they're the coolest part of the game, but you would think wrong, because this also happens before they get a chance to do their thing. Holy shit, I'm gonna ultra bust. Papa Smurf may no longer be the biggest one in the galaxy, but seeing him coming to the rescue while firing his bolters into the traitors while his hands are just resting by his side is beautiful. Matt Ward continues to be proven right. And part of the ending mission being leading a whole bunch of Marines against Chaos is just wonderful. The game ends with Titus going off to be redeployed and everyone having a newfound respect for each other. In spite of what I said earlier, this does still feel a little bit satisfying. If I was reading this as a book and the plot beats played out the same, I'd probably feel robbed, but as the story of a hack-and-slash murderthon, it does the job pretty alright. Aside from my gripes about how they characterize Titus in this game, my only real criticism is that I miss the orcs. Yeah, the Tyranids are a blast to fight, and yeah, Grimskull's boss fight was shit, but he was a fun character. How could he not be? He's an orc. With the Tyranids having no capacity for emotion, and chaos being as serious as it ever is, I miss the orcs bringing the levity they always do to a game like this. That being said, chaos is at least in full evil mastermind mode, instead of Horus Heresy mode, where people pretend it has the moral high ground, so that's good at least. The narrative was overall pretty decent, but like I said, we're here to cut up aliens and heretics. In that regard, the story campaign is flawless. Although with that in mind, if you're wondering why I breezed through the story so quickly, relatively speaking, it's because what else do you want me to say? Fun as it is for the most part, it is not an inspired story. Could you have possibly guessed that the scheme to defeat chaos using an artifact that allowed chaos onto Graia will fail? Or that the Tyranids will be defeated and chaos will remain the final threat, just as Tzeentch planned? I could talk about that, but what's the point? If you have basic reading comprehension, you know how the story's gonna go. There's no point in dwelling on it too much. Oh, and Leandros is here. The guy writing Titus's ass about the Codex and corruption all campaign long turns out to be the same guy from the last time. Who'da thunk it? You know, the funny thing is that Leandros is the ideal person for the Imperium when it comes to how they view chaos, corruption, and whatnot. If you don't believe me, go read what happened to the Flame Falcons. If you think the Imperium hasn't looked a gift horse in the mouth and then shot it before, you haven't read enough about the Imperium. But there are 2 more game modes to cover. The first is Operations. You play as one of the 6 multiplayer classes, and you act as the B squad to Titus's A team. You help perform all sorts of tasks so that Titus, Gadriel, and Chiron can do their thing. For example, in one of the operations, you set a trap for the Hive Tyrant leading the Tyranids and then finish it off. You can hear Titus informing your squad that it isn't dead after the trap because the Tyranids are still fully coordinated. On Titus's end, at one point you fight a Carnifex, kill it, and then 3 more show up. Right as you're done filling your pants with diarrhea at the prospect of fighting 3 Carnifexes at once, they all die because the Synapse connection is broken thanks to the squad in operations. It's an awesome way to show that even though the main company is mostly just 3 dudes, the Ultramarines' second company is fighting in its entirety. This isn't just a war with Ultramarines in it, this is a war that the Ultramarines are waging themselves. You can upgrade your weapons and perks in this mode too, giving you some replayability and progression to work for. Upgrade your guns, try out harder difficulties, and upgrade some more. Very nice, but with some flaws that add up slowly. Let's talk about the PvP first, because my main one's tied to that. PvP is just PvP. You've got Team Deathmatch, capture a moving point, or capture 3 stationary points. You pick one of 6 classes, the more you play them, the more weapon options you get, and go beat the hell out of either traitors or loyalists, depending on which side you get. It's simple, but a lot more fun than I thought it'd be, and if anything reminds me of some good old classic Xbox 360 era gaming. This is not the last time I'll make that comparison. I'm sure you'll find any number of different people saying X class is the best, or Y class sucks, but at least to me, none of them are noticeably worse than the others. Assault is the class most often called bad, but I think a lot of people are just diving into the middle of the enemy team by themselves and getting angry when they get melted. Use your jump pack, drop in at the right time, and you'll do just fine as the assault class. Don't be an idiot. And yes, I am bitter right now. It's because whenever I look at who's at the bottom of the scoreboard on my team, it's usually the moron who's jumping into the middle of the enemy team as assault. Tactical is the all-rounder boring one, but it still feels good, and the Auspex lets you obliterate scan targets. Sniper goes invisible and can use a close-range bolter to become an assassin. Vanguard is great for dealing with lone enemies or stunning bulwarks. Bulwarks between their armor regenerating ability and shield can make sure that no one ever dies ever, and the Heavy is heavy weapons guy. He has a Reinhardt shield to block range damage, and a very big gun. They even balanced out melee really well. Bullets need to go through enemy armor, but melee ignores it. If you get into range and strike first with melee, you've got a good shot at winning. On the flip side, rushing into melee while the enemy team is firing at you is a great way to not only get killed, but make more people complain about how assault is a bad class. Pro tip, the time to kill is a lot quicker than in campaign. Don't run into stupid fights. Especially in Annihilation, the game tends to start by having each team run around the map for a minute straight looking for each other, and then wherever they meet is where the rest of the match is going to be fought as respawns flood back in. Outside of gameplay, you get the fun character customizer. This might be the best one since Dawn of War. All the colors are GW paints, and the armor is highly customizable, with all sorts of bits and paints to unlock for your special dudes. That being said, it has issues too. In fact, even though the campaign's done, there's a couple more issues that it's time to just finally sit down and lay out. If you're still in the new game glazing period, click away, but if you'd like to hear me out, then get ready. First off is performance issues. The loading times of this game must have taken inspiration from GTA and the Xbox 360. You can potentially be sat there for minutes on end with the bar not moving an inch. There were times where I wanted to cancel multiplayer searching after a match, and it took me so long to load that I didn't have time to cancel the searching. I know Zoomers and their attention spans are complete garbage, so maybe it's just a me problem on that front, but if you're playing this game, I recommend having a book or something to read while you're waiting. It's that long. Sometimes cutscenes will also just freeze, and sometimes the audio desyncs and characters are reacting to lines that haven't even been fully spoken yet. This, to the game's credit, doesn't happen as often during gameplay, but it still can. And to some extent, this is probably a me problem. Most people aren't going to be capturing footage while they're playing this game, and my PC could just be getting up there in age a bit. But even during PvP, people I've played with have complained about their game just freezing mid-match. Either bump the graphics down or get ready for a new card, because Space Marine 2 demands your entire PC's performance capacity be given to the Emperor. Having not played on PlayStation or Xbox, I can't speak to those platforms' performance, but I've been told that PlayStation has some major issues. My second main issue, and the first actual in-game problem, is the progression system. To my immense joy, there is no premium currency, so in terms of consumer friendliness, they're knocking it out of the park again. If you want to unlock new paint schemes, they're separated by chapters that have that color as their own. But to unlock the color you want, you need to unlock that chapter's emblem first. It's created this weird situation where people who only ever want to play as a couple chapters for their multiplayer guy are fine because they can unlock all that in one go. But if you want to create Battle Brother Crayolas of the Crayon Eaters or Brother Nuffless of the Chicago Bears chapter, you have to wait forever to get those colors. As good as the system is for customizing, and it's also pretty limited. There's not nearly as many armor options as I would like, and the ones that are there are all pretty Ultramarine themed. I'm happy with it because I like the Ultramarines, but some more options from other chapters would be nice. If nothing else, please let me get a hood like the Dark Angels do. They have the best aesthetic for Space Marines. The same currency you use to unlock these customizations is also part of the upgrades and operations. So if you don't care about operations, you're fine, but if you want to play that game mode, you now have to make a choice between customizing your guy or upgrading his stats. Even with all that, I might not mind if the currency wasn't so slow to get. A multiplayer match might get you enough for an emblem, or just under the amount needed for a paint. They're not long games, but having to play 2 matches of Team Deathmatch to unlock a different shade of red is kind of ridiculous. This also doesn't include weapon cosmetics, which you need to buy separately as you level up that class. Speaking of customization, if you load in as Chaos in PvP, you get none. Each class is instead locked to a Traitor Marine. Black Legion for Tactical, Night Lords for Assault, World Leaders for Vanguard, Death Guard for Bulwark, Alpha Legion for Sniper, and Iron Warrior for Heavy. They're very well done models and have more flair to them than the Loyalists initially, but you can't change them. They are fitting. Iron Warriors being the heavy weapons guy makes sense, and giving the Khorne guy a grappling hook so he can rush into the fight quicker is very funny, but the only thing you can change is your loadout and what color you want your Chaos Marines armor to be. If you want your Death Guard Bulwark with visible cancerous growths on him to be colored like a Night Lord, then go nuts, I guess, but some more options would be great. Maybe they'll add some stuff for them in the future, but that brings me to my next criticism. Everything about the multiplayer that isn't the moment-to-moment gameplay is insubstantial. There's of course the customization problems, but a much bigger letdown is that there's only 3 maps. They're good maps, and they play nicely, but there's only 3 maps. Speaking of 3, you can only search for matches as of right now in groups of 3, despite the fact PvP is always 6v6. Want to group up with all the lads for some Space Marine action? Well, you can't. Unlike Valve, we're not done with that number though, because there's also only the 3 game modes I described earlier. Multiplayer is very fun, but there needs to be more of it. This criticism will age the video even more than criticizing a live service game for not having enough stuff in it, but there's not even private lobbies yet. You have to group up with 3 and join matchmaking. You can't set up a private game between friends. Do you want to have a fun game night with a big group of friends, or put down an arrogant Dutchman in a 1v1 and show him where he belongs? Well, right now you can. If the multiplayer was mid, I might not mind, but the multiplayer is honestly a ton of fun, and seeing how many small problems it has is frustrating. If it was held off for another month, I can guarantee you it'd be 1,000 times better, because the roadmap shows that a lot of these basic features are coming soon. Which means, yeah, I'm aging this video for a year from now when we look back at the mountain of maps and game modes and call me silly, but right now it's in a position that reminds me more than anything of Halo Infinite. We've got a fantastic core framework for the multiplayer, but they've forgotten to put anything on top of the framework. I'm not bored of it yet, but if it doesn't add stuff quickly, I will be. For my last complaint about the multiplayer, I'm just going to present present you with this image. When you either play the multiplayer yourself or watch someone play it, you'll know what I mean. And to end on a complaint that absolutely just boils down to skill issue, I hate that level with all the rippers that swarm you and pile on each other to literally drown you in bugs. You need to use the Pyroblaster, which sucks. I felt like I was pissing on regular enemies instead of doing any actual damage, but you can't get rid of it because you need it to deal with the Ripper tsunamis. Those also suck to deal with because you're forced to use the Pyroblaster and slowly make your way through an ocean of bugs. It completely kills the pacing of the game, because instead of being this mighty action hero, you turn into a slow and lumbering group of 3 getting pelted with rocks by all the Tyranids around you. Please remove this mission. Still though, all things considered, this game is absolutely worth your time. Harsh as I may have been the past few minutes, the moment-to-moment gameplay is phenomenal, and the overall depiction of the 40k universe, from the most grand set pieces to little bits of dialogue and visuals, is flawless. The overall game has flaws, but those flaws are outweighed by at least enough for you to get your money's worth by the amazing core of the game. If you're obsessed over getting every single story beat possible pertaining to 40k, this game is already in your library. If you don't care about that and just want a fun hack and slash game, get this game. And if the multiplayer is what you're really craving, give it a few months, but keep a close eye. It's already got the fundamentals down, it just needs to add some more features, and all will be right as rain. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Ultramarines to my Imperium of Man, a superior and wonderful group standing ahead above all the rest. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Don't forget the most important part of this, though, naming your multiplayer, fellas. Everyone into Warhammer makes at least some homebrew stuff, it's only right. My Tactical and Assault Marines are, as discussed, brothers Nuffless and Crayolas of the Chicago Bears and Crayon Eaters chapter, respectively. My Heavy is brother Brick of the Shithouse chapter, my Sniper is just some dude from the Genesis chapter because I think their lore is funny, and I swear I had a good reason for painting my Vanguard this way, but I can't remember it. And of course, last but not least is my Bulwark, brother Virgil.